Okay, so for our next lecture segments, we are going to be looking at personality from the biological approach. And do you remember what the foci were for the biological approach? Now, this is a great little exercise for you to do. We're going to do it a few times throughout the semester. It's really helpful whenever we do anything like this to actually participate in it. It will help your grade. So I'm going to switch to the next slide here. What I would like you to do is to take out a piece of paper and then hit the pause button on here. Okay, so hit the pause button, then go get a piece of paper, sit down, look at each of these approaches we went over on the first day. Try to see if you can remember the focus or foci for each one without looking back in your notes. Okay, we'll run over the answers as soon as you click that video back on, but take a moment to do that. Okay, so for the psychodynamic approach, these first two hopefully were very easy for you because we just covered them in great detail. And the psychodynamic approach, of course, was unconscious influences, things that affect your personality without your knowledge. The second one, the trait approach, this is trait dimensions, studying personality using trait dimensions. Remember those dimensions, like a scale of 1 to 100 or 0 to 50, whatever people are measured on the same dimension for a particular trait. And now we can see where you differ, where you are on the scale, and how that predicts differences in behavior. So that is a study of personality using trait dimensions. Okay. Now, the biological approach that we're going to be going into in these lecture segments and covering, had two different foci, and one of them is genetics. So how much of your personality is actually was passed on to you from your biological mother and father? We're going to get to the answer of that today and also figure out, how do we know that? The other focus, really cool one, is physiology. So how does your personality affect your physiology? And the humanistic approach, you might remember, that's the positive side of human nature. These are the psychologists that said, we want to study the most psychologically healthy people out there, the best specimens of personality. So the positive side of human nature, and also free will. So remember that word human in there should remind you of both things. Positive side of human nature, and then unique to humans, free will. Then we have the behavioral approach. That's pretty easy because it's kind of right in there, right? This is learned overt behavior. Overt meaning observable. So that's kind of the opposite flip of the coin, side of the coin there from the biological approach, genetics component. So now how much of your personality is learned, instead of being genetic. And then finally, we've got the cognitive approach, and this is really cool. How does your personality affect your thought processes, or the other way around? How do your thought processes affect your personality? So we're looking at the biological approach now, and those two foci. So genetics, of course, being the inherited component of your personality, heritability, and also remember physiology. So, how is your physiology related to your personality? So we see differences in physiology in people according to the personalities. Some really cool work we're going to look at today. We're going to be covering two different theorists. And the first one is Hans Eysenck, and what he called his super traits. Kind of ahead of his time. He was predicting what would be the big ones, and we know today that there are the big, how many? Good test of your memory. 5, remember from our very first lecture segments in our introduction to this class, and also in our trait approach lecture segments when we talked about the big 5. But he was way ahead of his time, and he actually guessed 2 of them correctly, way ahead of time, and he wasn't quite wrong on the third. He just defined it differently. And then we're also going to be looking at David. Now, Dave is actually still living and teaching and doing research today in Texas. And David Buss and his evolutionary theories are the theorists we're going to look at today for the first part, the first lecture segments of the biological approach. And then the second set of segments will be on some really cool research, further research from this approach. We need to start here, before we can start with Hans Ising, we need to actually bring some of you up to date on genetics. And now, many of you may have had a genetics course before, but I'm sure that some of you haven't. And so what we're going to give you here is a really quick and dirty kind of introduction to genetics. Just the basics that you need to know in order to appreciate how we know what we know about the percentage of personality that's passed on genetically, and to appreciate this. Now, some terminology here. You know, your chromosomes are those thread-like structures that carry your DNA molecules. Your DNA molecules are kind of like the blueprint that you received from your mother and your father, and each strand actually contains thousands of genes. Genes are simply the key unit of heredity. Okay? But genes have 2 different alleles. Each gene has 2 different alleles, one of them from your biological mother and one of them from your biological father. Okay? Now, a few other terms, not quite so basic. Genotype. Now, when we talk about your genotype, okay, the answer is always going to be a couple of letters of the alphabet. And they might be kept and they may not be kept. It's really important whether they are or not, right? Those of you who've taken this know that capital means dominance. Okay? So the genotype is going to be symbolically portraying the actual alleles that you have for whatever we're asking about. Okay? And the symbols, you know, remember that you have 2 alleles, for instance, for eye color, and they're going to be symbolized with 2 different letters of the alphabet. Another important thing to know is that we're going to be looking at eye color. Okay, we're going to use eye color as an example. One of the reasons for that is if we just look between blue and black eye color and use that as an example, that is something that is monogenetic. In other words, it is determined by a single gene, just those 2 alleles on a gene. It's determined by that. Okay, now we get into green and violet and such colored eyes. It's a little more complicated, so we're going to stick with blue and brown. But blue is symbolized in your genotype. Okay, if you have an allele for blue eyes, it's a lowercase b. If you have an allele for brown eyes, it is an uppercase b because brown is dominant. Okay, so your genotype is symbols for the actual genes, the actual alleles. And then the phenotype, okay, is how they're expressed. It's just the expression of them. So if somebody asked you your genotype, you would give them 2 letters, and whether they were kept or not. And if they asked you for your phenotype, you give them your eye color. That's how it's expressed, the color of your eyes. So I can tell you that my genotype for eye color is 2 lowercase b's, and my phenotype is blue. All right, monogenetic, couple more terms here. When we say monogenetic, hey, we're talking about This is something that is determined by one gene, one only, okay? Now, there are some physical things that are determined by one gene. Of course, many of them are actually polygenetic, and they're determined by more than one, sometimes many, okay? But there are some things. When we talk about psychological things like personality and behavior, and thought processes and genes that have been related to them, those are polygenetic. So they don't tend to be monogenetic. They're almost always polygenetic. There are a couple of behaviors I want to give you as examples just to show you, though, how rare this is. So it's hard to think of something besides eye color that's monogenetic. In fact, if you took a genetics course before, it's very likely that you studied what kind of plant. I'm going to say a pea pod, because pea pods are monogenetic, and so that's where you need to start to study this, because you really need much more than a pencil and paper. You need a computer to study polygenetic influences. So you always start with monogenetic. And again, hard to come up with examples, but let me give you a couple of interesting ones. Here's one. How many of you have ever known of a child who had a habit of taking a small strand of their hair and, finding it and then wrapping it around their finger and then, excuse me if I don't actually do this, but yank it out, okay? So when I teach this class, I generally have 115 students, and I have about 12 students raising their hand now. So it's not that common. However, we've never had a class where nobody raised their hands out of that many students. And the deal is, that is actually something that is monogenetic. So that behavior is based in genes, and it's coming off a single gene, being determined by a single gene. One thing that's important is if you're worried about the effects of a behavior that's genetic, instead of changing the behavior, you're going to want to redirect it, right? It's a genetic behavior. So instead, you're going to want to try to redirect it. You're going to, have a lot better chance of being successful by trying to redirect it. And so, if little kids do this, it's not to the extent that they have a bloody scalp or anything horrible like that. But why do you think parents become concerned about it? And you might have guessed that their beautiful little child with their beautiful set of hair starts developing a bald spot on whatever side, if they're right-handed, this side, right? On the side of their head that's related to their handedness. And there's a really easy way to redirect this behavior, actually. And that is you buy the child either a doll with a good set of hair or a troll. You guys even know what trolls are? Sure you do. So they have the crazy colored hair, right? So you might want to get that child, if you know somebody who does this, you can get them a doll or a troll for Christmas. And don't be surprised if the next year you have to replace it because the doll or the troll has gone bald. But it's really easy to direct them and train them to redirect that behavior, usually, to a doll or a troll. And then they, as they get older, they'll outgrow it. Hey, let me give you one more really interesting example of a behavior that's monogenic. So take your hands and clasp them in front of you like this. Keep them clasped. Now I want you to look down and to determine whether it is your right or your left thumb on top. Is your right or left thumb on top? Okay, my left thumb is on top. And if we were all here in a live classroom today, all 115 or so of us who are watching this video, we were all here in one place in one time, and we raised our hands for those of us who had the left thumb on top, and then those who have the right thumb on top. okay, you would see that left thumb on top is definitely dominant. Right thumb on top is recessive. Now, if you don't believe me that that behavior is actually programmed into your genes, I want you to stop a minute and do something. I want you to do it the other way. Now, you can do it the other way. Of course you can. But I want you to see what it feels like. Okay? All right. Now we're going to do a little bit of practice before we move on. So just to make sure that you really understand the concept of dominance, So we said that if brown is dominant over blue, and if that's true, then you're seeing the genotypes for a biological mother and a biological father on the slide. And you would imagine that both of their eyes are blue. You could infer that. But what I want you to do is I want you to take out a piece of paper. I want you to get your piece of paper out, okay? You're going to pause this video and you're going to figure out what percentage of brown and blue-eyed children you would expect, actually, from this couple. Let me give it to you differently. I'm going to give you 3 questions. First off, I want you to figure out how many possible genotypes in their offspring, in their kids. Then I want you to figure out how many possible phenotypes in their offspring, and then what percentage of each, brown and blue, okay, would be your prediction. And so go ahead, take out a piece of paper, pause this video, and figure out your guesses. All right, and the answer to this, okay, how many possible genotypes? 3. How many possible phenotypes? 2. Okay, and the percentages, we would expect 75% brown and 25% blue. Now, if you didn't get this correct, here's a super easy way of doing this, very systematic, quick and easy way to do it. For instance, for our first test coming up, second test coming up. All right, first test coming up, whatever, your next test. You just lay it out like this first. So you've got this 2x2 table, and you put the biological mother on top, biological father on the side there, and you put their genotypes in these cells, and then you fill in each cell. Order does not matter. Order does not matter. Okay, so these two, you'll see, are the same, and we've got 3 different genotypes, and we have 2 different phenotypes. Okay, and you'll see that 75% you would predict if those children would have brown eyes, and 25% would have blue eyes. So, oftentimes people will say, oh, my parents couldn't have passed on my personality to me because I'm very, very different than them. Okay, well, you may not be as different as you think at this age, and also, hey, you might hold some recessive genes from them. In fact, you likely do. Right. So I want you to do a couple more practice ones just to make sure that you're really solid on this before we go on. So go ahead. Here's a different biological mother and father. And first off, what color eyes do they have? Well, mom's got brown, right? Dad's got blue. So the only time that we see this blue coming out is when it's double recessive, because brown is dominant. So go ahead and figure out, 1, how many types of genotypes? How many genotypes possible in the kids? How many phenotypes possible in the kids? And what do you predict percentage-wise between blue and brown? Pause this video. All right. Here's your answer, 50% brown, 50% blue, right? And that's how your cells fill in on that one. Let's do just one more here. So that was 50 of 50. One more. Okay, go ahead and pause the video. And the answer to this is 100% brown, right? Two possible genotypes, only one possible phenotype, and that is brown.